I'm in hell, listening to the Kongversation where they interviewed Greg Duncan. Uh-oh, I see some games journalists down here, and they're taking notes!
Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I am Cameron Reigle.
And today, we finally continue discussing Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. So we started our episodes chronicling the game back in October, shortly after release, shortly after the game's launch, and time gets away from us, and here it is, early March, and we are now continuing from where we left off. So, for those of you who have not played the game yet, for one thing, shame on you. Even if you're poor and on the streets, you should have found a way. This is the priority. Playing video games rather than feeding yourself and giving yourself shelter. No, a game where you have to rescue cartoon bees should take precedent. But we do these instead of just saying, hey, this is our Impossible Lair episode. We wanted to give the game its just due, so we're breaking it up. But unlike how we did Tropical Freeze, which was by World when that came out, World 1, World 2, World 3, and the original Yooka-Laylee, which was by World or Grand Tome, this game is structured a little bit differently. So we're doing these in chunks. So roughly, we did chapters 1 through 8 the first time around, or up to Paywall 3. Now we're up to Paywall 5, so that will include chapters 9 through 14, I believe. So there's no real good way to break this down since there aren't worlds per se.
It's kind of weird. Like the Overworld map has certain like themed areas to it that you can kind of mentally parse as if they were worlds, but because it's so open-ended, you can't really delineate like, oh, this is every level encompassed by Crazy Kremland or K3.
Yeah.
It's these levels are near the desert part.
Yeah, and if we just covered one, like, biome or whatever, then we wouldn't really have much to talk about because it would be, like, 3, maybe 4 chapters. And, I mean, that is plenty to talk about, but in the interest of moving things along, we're not doing that. So this will take us up to the 5th paywall, and that will include the kind of arid, deserty, cliffy, canyony region. I would say western, but it takes place in the north part of the map, so I don't even know how you would define it. And then,
the music is very old westy, but it's kind of like a all-purpose, like desert, cliffside, arid environment.
Sure, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Banjo-Tooie mine. Oh shit, I'm a bad fan. I can't even fell out of my head, Cameron. I was
Glitter Gulch.
Glitter Gulch, yeah. I was like, Glitter Glaze Glacier? No, that's a glacier, and that's from Yooka-Laylee. Bad Hyle. Yeah. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of that, just kind of Brits doing a take on the American Southwest. And then we've also got the region just south of that, which is more lush. It's like it's a pond surrounded by grass. I make it sound really dull, but then there's also this kind of like flags on the side. We'll talk about that. But those two regions, basically up to the 5th paywall, and we'll try to stay spoiler free beyond that. So if you're playing along with the game, if you haven't gotten it yet, we won't spoil anything past the 5th paywall, which is what Trowzer, the snake, runs, basically extorting you from progressing any further unless you pay him with twit coins. So we'll have some chat about this area of the game. But first, Cameron, due diligence. What do you say? Trowzer extorts the player, we extort our listeners. So, DK Vine, we're on Patreon, dkvine.com/Patreon. Please think about supporting DK Vine. And it's not just because we want money, it's because we need money. We need money to operate, or else I would be out in the street, poor and starving, and looking for ways to play a video game before feeding myself. So, yeah, I'm not just shaming the poor. I am shaming myself because I would be among them if it wasn't for the Patreon. Anyway, we give you prizes and rewards for backing us. So it's not just, please give us money. It's give us money and we'll also give you immediate perks. And then, of course, that also feeds the production of stuff we do. So you'll get long-term benefits, but you also get immediate bribes. And those include stickers, $1 a month, and you get stickers. And we have just announced, haven't actually started rolling them out yet because there's been a little production mishap, but I'm taking care of it. And they'll be out to all our patrons from mid-February onward very shortly. But we've got the Series 5 stickers. And Cameron, I feel like I could just babble on about these stickers all day. So would you like to let our audience know what the stickers for Series 5, the 2020 DK Vine Patreon stickers, what characters those are?
With pleasure, Hyle. So, in Series 5 of DK Vine's Patreon stickers, you will see such familiar, well-known faces as Daisy Kong.
Right, and that's Daisy Kong with a question mark, too. Daisy Kong?
Daisy Kong. Next up, we have Naughty Witch. That's with an N, not a GN. So, not one of the beavers from Donkey Kong Country. And finally, a recent entry, Wasp Lady.
Wasp Lady, which might be apropos to this episode, but I don't think we'll be discussing Wasp Lady, because as you see, all these characters are not beloved IPs or trademarked characters owned by other companies or video game studios. No, these are all original creations that we couldn't possibly be litigated towards. So, Daisy Kong, Naughty Witch, and Wasp Lady. You'll get those. There's been 4 series of stickers before this, and those are still available for anybody who backs us at the $10 a month and up tiers. You'll get all of the legacy stickers. They're never out of print. They're just made less accessible. So anyway, dkevin.com/Patreon. I should also point out $2 and up a month gets you access to the DK Vinecraft server, or rather our Minecraft server. And we are now on the Bedrock edition of Minecraft, which means you can play it on your home consoles. And our community has been hard at work at sort of creating a Donkey Kong universe themed utopia on the server. Lots of recreations of things from across the DKU. And you can actually check out a recent tour of that we did on our YouTube channel at dkvine/YouTube, or rather, PooTube, because we're still demonetized. It's been over a year now, and I can't get anybody on the horn about that. But I'm still creating content. I'm not bitter, Cameron. I'm not bitter at all. And this tour, it's me and Jeff and our 4 mods, Adam and Andrew, going through everything that's been created so far for the Minecraft server. So get access to that, $2 up a month at dkvine.com/Patreon. And you can watch the tour at dkvine.com/YouTube. Okay. All right. Now, we do have a call to take for this episode, but it's not a call about the episode. But I thought I wouldn't save this for a call sack, because I don't know when the next call sack episode will be. So let's just take this now. Let's get it out of the way. Let's hear what this person has to say.
Hello, it's Alistair here. I hope you're all very well. Things have been pretty interesting over here. I'm very excited to say my wife is expecting a baby in May. However, we're struggling just a little bit with name ideas, and I could really use your help. I was just wondering, what Donkey Kong universe inspired baby names are currently in vogue for 2020? Thank you.
That's our old dear friend, Alistair Craig, who has been on this podcast in the past. And Alistair, I'm really bad at this, as his recent history has shown. So, congratulations on your baby. Your daughter or son. Congratulations, Alistair. Sincere, I mean that. I'm just really bad at wishing people well when it comes to children, and I don't know why that's a defect in my personality, but I'm sincerely happy for you, Alistair. And DKU baby names. Oh, this is fun. Now, if we could really sway this and get a DKU named Craig in the world, that would be fantastic. Of course, there's the perennial classic Baby Donkey Kong. You could always name your child Baby Donkey Kong. But I don't want to confuse them over their own personal canon and continuity. It's still a little unclear. So, Cameron, do you have any suggestions?
Maybe for a bit more longevity, you could go with young instead of baby, or junior.
Yeah.
Tough one. It's like most DKU names, you kind of got to wonder, because they're adjectives that kind of reflect their current personality or have nothing to do with it. So.
Right, and then when they age out of it, they have to change their name. Like, you know, we don't know what Wrinkly Kong's name was. Well, maybe Wrinkly Kong was named that as a baby because she was wrinkly as a baby, and then it also applied later in life. But it would have made for a really awkward, say, age 1 to 65. So I don't know what she would have done in that median period there. You could always go with the suggested names for Kiddy Kong back in the development of DKC3. I believe there was Diaper Kong on the table at all.
Well, there was also the runner-up names for Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong. The time might be right for Diet Craig.
No. Would it be Diet Alistair or Diet AC?
Oh yeah, because Well, you probably want to keep an A in there so that in the event Alistair is ever kidnapped and stuffed into a barrel, or his offspring is subject to the same, those kidnappers can abbreviate those barrels with the same initials. Sincerely, though, Alistair, congratulations.
I mean, I'm not
going to be a heck of a dad.
Yeah, but now I'm really just hung up on what name we could saddle this child with, and I really don't care about wishing him well anymore. I really want to achieve this goal of having a DKU name. So maybe we should open the field to our listeners. So if you have any suggestions on what to name the future offspring of Alistair, the sprog, as they say in Australian slang, then please call the DK Vine hotline at 1-202-630-VINE, that's 8463, and give us suggestions. And so we can give Alistair suggestions. And then so by May, we can have a new DKU branded child of one of our own. So congratulations, Alistair. And you brought this upon yourself and your child. So, yeah. All right. Well, moving on from the joyous news, let's get back into a joyous game, Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. So, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we are going to be discussing the western themed area in the north and the grassy, pondy, freezy, melty area to the south. Let's talk about the overworld first, because the overworld is honestly, I think, still my favorite part of the game. I love the chapters. I love, the side-scrolling action of the levels. But I have to say, man, the the overworld is what makes this game like god tier to me.
It's shocking to me how well balanced it is with the 2D platforming sections. Like, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like a wrapper that the levels are kept in. It feels like equal part and parcel a main part of the game.
Yeah, it's astounding actually how well it complements what you think of as the main action in the levels. And this was like a really hard sell, because I remember when the game was announced, everybody was like, oh, 2D side-scroller, oh, Donkey Kong Country spiritual successor, ooh. And Playtonic was really trying to stress, hey, no, the overworld is a big part of it. Look at what we're doing with the overworld, but nobody could really pay much mind to it, us included. And it wasn't until actually getting our hands on the game in October, we were like, oh, like, this is actually what makes this game, I think, like, such a forward-thinking entry in the genre, because it does kind of feel like Donkey Kong Country 3 or Super Mario World, like the map screens that are more than just map screens, right? Like map screens that have a great deal of exploration involved. It feels like an evolution of that. And it's essentially just a top-down experience, like Banjo-Kazooie Grunny's Revenge or Conker's Pocket Tales or any classic Zelda game, kind of just miniaturized a little bit to serve the needs of an overworld, but it is really engaging. Like, all of the little puzzles and hidden bits in there, it really is, I think, the most engaging part of the game. Like, the platforming is great, but it's the overworld that really makes the whole package that more impressive. I think it actually gives Tropical Freeze a run for its money due to the strength of the overworld, because when you compare it to Tropical Freeze, which just has a pretty rote map screen that is it's just there, kind of similar to the way it just was there in the original Donkey Kong Country. I think that's what makes Impossible Lair like, oh, this is a game that I might like more than Tropical Freeze. And yeah, I really can't stress that enough. But I also know that it's not something that really can be pitched or sold to people without them actually just trying it for themselves.
Yeah, I would love to see, like, how this concept was pitched, because, I mean, as you described, like, Tropical Freeze, it's a very pretty well-considered map screen, like, certainly a huge step up from the one in Returns, but functionally, at the end of the day, it's an interface.
Yeah.
You could achieve, like, the same thing with, like, text and bullets. It just wouldn't be nearly as thrilling, but the overworld, like, I was kind of shocked the first time I played through the game. Like, a lot of the times when I play through, at least when I find myself playing them nowadays, like a Donkey Kong Country game, retros games included, I want to do everything in, like, a specific area before I move on. Like, try to get all the collectibles. I don't bother with time trials. That's where I draw the line. But with Impossible Lair, I kept finding myself, like, skipping ahead in the overworld, like, as much as I could, just because I was having so much fun with it. And I kept worrying, like, oh, well, I imagine this part of the game is going to be, like, smaller in scope from the actual level, so I'm probably going to run out of stuff to do really soon, and I'm worried about that. And that concern was completely unfounded. I felt like it was exactly the right balance of content in the overworld versus the 2D platforming levels, and I loved it to bits.
Yeah, and I know I've said this again and again when it comes to this game, but one of the things I love about Donkey Kong Country 3 is the map screen, and one of my hopes for the inevitable continuation of the series. This is, before Donkey Kong Country Returns. I say inevitable, but there was a time when it seemed like a pipe dream. But I'd always imagined if we ever got a fourth Donkey Kong Country game proper, then it would just build on where 3 left off. And in a lot of ways, Donkey Kong Country Returns went backward too much in a lot of areas to be more of a spiritual successor or a soft reboot, sort of in a Force Awakens style, to the original Donkey Kong Country. And we lost all of the progression that was made on making the map screen, making the bleed between the levels to be just as engaging as the levels themselves. And it feels like Impossible Lair said, "Oh no, we can do that. Let's continue carrying that baton that was just dropped here in the bushes, and let's do it." And I'm not slagging what Retro did with the Donkey Kong Country series, because I love both Returns and Tropical Freeze. I mean, Tropical Freeze is still one of my favorite platformers of all time, but it's just this kind of scratches this itch that I've had, and it's so satisfying to have it scratched. And I'm just kind of rolling around on the floor with my legs up in the air like a dog, like enjoying it so much.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the comparisons to Tropical Freeze are going to keep coming up, and not as a way of tearing Tropical Freeze down, but just kind of, I'd say Impossible Lair opened my eyes to things I had missed from game design, years of game design past, that I didn't know that I was missing. And yeah. I think a major one that the Overworld delivers on that I didn't realize I had kind of grown to miss in Donkey Kong Country games past 3 was I miss just being able to talk to other characters.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure, because as I always say about the Donkey Kong Country games, it's not just about Donkey Kong. It's called Donkey Kong Country, and part of that is the community of people who are supporting you on your adventure or who you meet along the way. And it really does feel like Impossible Lair is such a fleshed out world. It's a world I believe in. More so than even the original Yooka-Laylee. Like, I really just get the sense that this is a world populated by these weirdos. And that's making me more invested in what's happening on the screen. It's not just this very mechanical, mathematical, okay, this is a game, this is how it plays. Isn't this enjoyable? It's, oh man, I'm really getting into this world. It's what made me a Donkey Kong Country fan to begin with. And it's something that I think is baked into Rare as a developer. And of course, it's baked into Playtonic as well. It's just that magic, that little extra mile that's always taken. And yeah, I've really missed this kind of thing. And I feel like Impossible Lair, I don't know if it opened my eyes because I was aware it was kind of missing in the retro games, but it's really driven it home. And I know this is something Jeff has gone on about while we've discussed the game, is that, yeah, it just made him realize like what Tropical Freeze does lack. And that's not to take away from what Tropical Freeze has going for it, which is quite a bit. But it's just, we're all fans of the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy. And so I think we're all fans of those elements that have been underserved. Because, let's be honest, the Nintendo design ethos, especially the classic Nintendo design ethos, which might have been driven by somebody like Tanabe, it is very much like, this is what we focus on as developers, but it's always that little extra bit of context, of lore, of world building that might not be essential to make a quote-unquote good game, but that it does matter, I think, or it can matter, depending on what type of game you are trying to make. And there's no wrong way, I think, one way or another, but I don't know. It's going beyond just game design 101. Like, oh no, this is good game design by these very narrow parameters. And anything outside of that, that's just fluff. That doesn't matter. We need to focus on these core elements. Well, yeah, focus on those core elements, but then if you have time, please give us more, because this is the kind of stuff I obviously get off on. So, but yeah, the two regions of the overworld, we got the western area, and that's, I think, really defined by two things. One, we see the home of Trowzer the Snake. It's kind of his ramshackle caravan trailer type thing. But this is where Trowzer, when he's not hiding out in the paywalls, this is where he actually lives. And it's kind of cool to have that established in this area.
Yeah, it's like his version of like a Funky Flights or a Candy's tent in a way.
I guess
but put in one, cemented in one place.
Yeah, maybe the equivalent would be Wrinkly's Save Cave, because that was as established, or maybe Funky's Rentals would be better, because Wrinkly's Save Cave was supposed to be one location, but it was accessed through all the tunnels in the Northern Hemisphere. But that's kind of lost on the map screen in DKC3 because they all look the same.
I guess a funny thing about this being a caravan is that if Impossible Lair actually did play by the same rules as Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 and was like delineated into these specific worlds, Trowzer's Caravan has a baked-in excuse as to why there is one in every level, unlike, say, Cranky having, like, a ridiculous amount of identical museums strewn throughout the island, which is the caravans on wheels that can move.
Yeah. I mean, like, with Candy, I could say, okay, it may make sense that she would have, like, 6 tents that are sort of the same. But, yeah, Cranky is just, like, what, in Kong terms, he would be rich, maybe, because he is the caretaker of the island, or at least was before Donkey Kong took over for him. But, like, he's got, like, all these identical homes and establishments, and, the caravan would make sense, but there's just one of them, and, I was gonna say it might be setting things up for a sequel, but not with its, inevitable fate, but that would be spoiler territory. But yeah, Trowzer is there, and you don't know why he's there at first. It's kind of place setting for something that happens later in the game. Because there's something just beyond the caravan, but you can't see it at this point in time.
I think it's also like establishing a bit of like what Trowzer does with all the money and quills that you keep piling on top of him.
Yeah. And I do like that it would make sense that this snake creature would make his home in the arid parts of this land mass island. Maybe
I'd never even considered that, but yeah, it does.
Yeah, and so you've got that, and you've also got the Pipe family, and this is a bit weird, like the fact that there are 5 anthropomorphic pipes just hanging around in the desert area, and I've tried to think about the rationale, why they're there, why they exist, and I've got nothing. They're just anthropomorphic pipes, and their names, and they were all named by Daly, by the way, one of her contributions to the game, aside from writing all of the tonic descriptions, was coming up with these pipes. And so we've got Pipo, which is the big one that is broken when we first wander into the desert. There's Piper, the one inside the hut, who I believe is that Pipo's daughter?
I get them mixed up. Yeah, I think the one inside the hut is the daughter, and the next one, is it Pipey or Pippy? I think it's Pipey.
Well, Pippy would make more sense as an actual name. Like,
But pipey would actually have the pipe sound in it.
Right, but I'm not sure, so we'll just hedge our bets. It's one of those. And
but they're outside, and are they may be Pipo's son, maybe?
Maybe.
I apologize. This was not my strong suit, being able to remember which one was which.
And this shit matters, too, so you should apologize.
I should, really. It's... No. Why was I playing through all the levels to, like, study their design intricacies? No. What I needed to do to prepare for this episode was to painstakingly document the lore of the entire Pipe family, and I have failed my duty miserably.
You have. For shame. You'll just flagellate yourself, Cameron, please. Just whip yourself, and then I will think about forgiving you. Pipette is the one that's underground in the...
with the conveyor belts in the box,
with the conveyor
right?
belts, yeah. Yeah, Pipette. And then there's Tuba, which is the...
This one I didn't need help remembering who was who.
So Tuba has a wonky eye, like a lazy eye that just kind of spinning about. And Tuba's also a dick.
Yeah, Tuba is a giant jerk. Which is... That tends to be how I... Which rare and platonic characters do I tend to remember most? The ones that are obliviously happy, like Rextro, and the ones that are just miserable, awful people to be around, like Kazooie and Laylee and Tuba.
And Cranky.
And Cranky.
Yeah. So... basically, the whole Pipe family is there to set up one thing, and that is essentially... I mean, maybe I'm being a little over simple here, but they're there to set up the state change of one chapter. But
I mean,
and
broadly,
again,
they're there to kind of exposit what you need to do to unlock each state change.
Yeah. But like the actual mechanics of them existing, they're like a cooling system in the desert. For what? I don't know. Maybe it's tied to Ivory Towers, which is just south of the desert in the established lore. But so maybe there's like some sort of cooling system attached to that. I don't know. It's all a bunch of nonsense. Really,
and they call attention to the fact that, I mean, they're big anthropomorphic pipes stuck in the ground, so they can't move. They're just stuck there like that.
Yeah, so Pipo is broken, and the air conditioning is broken as a result. So you basically have to figure out how to fix Pipo, and that involves quite a bit. But eventually, you move pipes around, and you reconnect the bit that's broken, and then you fix Pipo. I'm really making it sound dull and not worth your time. But
I would say what sells me on each of these characters, like in premise, they just sound like there's googly eyes on pipes. But what sells them to me as characters is their voices, because I just absolutely love these voices. I think they're some of the most hilarious ones out of both games.
Especially Tuba. Tuba's really stuck with me. I don't even know what it's supposed to be conveying about Tuba. But
I don't know. A lot of them are just these like monosyllabic, like I don't know, like trying to enunciate like something like banging around in a pipe, I guess.
That's going to be my new ringtone, Cameron. Just you doing that voice. I'm going to take it. I'm going to put it on my phone whenever I get an emergency call, because I'm everybody's emergency contact. That will be the sound of terror I associate it with. So, I mean, a ringing phone in general is terrifying, but that's just because when I was a kid and somebody would call my house after, say, 9 o'clock, my mom would scream, "Somebody's dead." And so it gave me a complex about ringing phones, which is why I have to have my phone on silent all the time. But maybe you doing the pipe voice will help bring me back from that abyss, and I can slowly reacquaint myself with ringing phones. So there you go. So just south of the desert too, we've got the pond, and the pond is the set piece for 2 chapters that you can access, but it also features the return of a character from the original Yooka-Laylee, and that's Nimbo the Cloud. And Nimbo is, of course, seen in Tribal Stack Tropics in the first Yooka-Laylee, where he could influence... Well, you could influence him by shooting berries into him, and then he could snow or rain and affect the environment around him. And it's much the same thing here.
Yeah, I think Nimbo's problem in this one is that he's a bit stopped up.
Well, yeah, they always equate Nimbo's meteorological needs with the human need to relieve one's bowels or urinate. So, yeah, when he says he's stopped up, I believe the implication is for him that would be like being constipated. So, it's very, very clever and erudite. All the writing for Nimbo, Andy Robinson's lasting legacy in this world. Yeah, but Nimbo, as you might imagine, by freezing the pond or thawing the pond, it has a very obvious effect on the 2 chapters that are within the pond. So, and again, what I love about the overworld in this game is that not only is it this amazing game unto itself, but it creatively plays with the chapters and the way the Grand Tome has been broken apart. The Grand Tome of the Royal Stingdom has been separated into all these chapters, which are represented by books. If those chapters are affected in any physical way in the overworld, that affects the inside of the Grand Tome itself. So you freeze the pond, well then that Grand Tome is frozen, and you've affected the level within. And sometimes they're a lot more complicated and creative than just that, but yeah, it's I think a really, really playful and innovative way that, you know, the 2 sides of the game play off each other.
Right, and I do appreciate in this spot in particular that a lot of the times the way that you figure out what the state change is and activate it the first go around will involve like a thinker of a puzzle that kind of takes a bit to actually get all the pieces in motion and finally lock down. But as soon as you solve it, some kind of mechanism will become apparent, either like a switch that you can just pull a single block off of, or just going to that level from the menu, like a shortcut so that changing that state back and forth isn't as complicated the second time around and then on. Like, in this specific case, I appreciated that. So when Nimbo freezes the pond, which some of the chapters are stuck in, when he freezes it, the pond becomes like a sort of like a dungeon ice puzzle, like you might find in like my go-to reference is Pokemon Gold and Silver, like the ice cave, where you have to position yourself over the part of the level you want to go to, but once you actually activate those states, you can just go to those levels from the menu. It'll plop you down right on that specific part of the pond. And if you want to unfreeze or refreeze the lake, all you have to do is hit Nimbo with the corresponding berry that makes him do that. Yeah.
It creates, I think, for me, a greater level of believability. Like the concept of Grand Tomes and then a Grand Tome being split across chapters is far-fetched and outside of our actual reality, our day-to-day life. But when you've got such a degree of thought put into it, and it really just comes across as, okay, this is totally believable, this makes sense, and I really do believe in this world. And it's that rare platonic sort of touch. It's just thinking through all the details and not really leaving anything to the unexplained, and it really does, like, the whole state change thing. Like, when it's sold to you, you're like, okay, so we're gonna have less levels then, because you're just playing the same level twice. But, oh man, it works. And the fact that it's different each time, that it's not just, you're not just always treating over the same ground either. Sometimes it just completely has a separate stage attached to it as a result of your changes. Other times, it's like flipping the stage around, as we'll discuss a little bit later, but it's just a brilliant mechanic. I can't speak well enough about this game. It's just, it continues to astound me every time I play it, like how brilliant it is.
Yeah, I also like, in this specific instance, but it speaks to like a greater theme in the whole game, I like how the specific way you make this state change in the overworld is you solve a problem for Nimbo, but then if you need the state change back the other way, you can just create the problem for him all over again. And I think that speaks to there's a recurring theme of callousness in Impossible Lair that I think is Platonic nailing down the identity that is the humor of Yooka-Laylee, because some of the like strongest resonance of some of the most strongly resonant jokes from the first Yooka-Laylee were these shock moments of just some Yooka and Laylee either intentionally or accidentally doing something awful to someone around them.
Yeah.
And I think they've really run with that in Impossible Lair, and it's always funny to me.
It's sort of a benign callousness where there's an innocence to it. It's not just you're bullying people. It's like,
not
whoops.
It's not squishing a baby dinosaur with a giant stone to sacrifice him to a giant stone dinosaur head god, but it's like largely minor inconveniences. There's some more severe, but
yeah, you're basically running around this world as an agent of chaos. And the chaos that it creates can sometimes be devastating, or it can sometimes be very minor, but there's no harm really meant. So again, yeah, it's not like the Conquer thing where you killed Bloopy the dinosaur and now you can never forgive this character, no matter how much like growth they have. It's just like this line has been crossed, and no, that's not funny. And oh god, like I hate you now, Conquer.
Even the parts in Impossible Lair where you kind of cross the line, they telegraph that you're going to cross it in a way that you see it coming enough that it's funny and not horrifying.
Yeah, it's not Conquer murdering a baby who thinks it's his mother and smirking about it. I can't get past Bloopy.
It's the kind of effect of like, oh, I love all of these expensive glass plates I'm carrying around. It would be a shame if somebody dropped a banana peel in front of my foot right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's more classic kind of cartoony slapstick versus the South Park Cartman style. I'm just gonna straight up murder your parents and feed them to you. Ain't I a stinker? Style of bleakness that Conquer sometimes descended into. I should also point out, adjacent to the frozen pond, to the left of it, is a weird golf course type thing. There's a bunch of flags, and this is like, throughout the overworld there are hidden tonics. So this is where I remember they distinctly hit a tonic or two. But yeah, I just like the weirdness that there is just in the overworld what appears to be a golf course.
I didn't know what to make of this area when I came across it, because a lot of the set pieces in the overworld are telegraphed to the point where you can kind of tell what they're supposed to be. This one was kind of ambiguous to me, and I think it took until this recent playthrough to get that, like, I think what this is like there's some logging being done, and that's why the entire area is covered in stumps.
Now, perhaps it was like perhaps it's like Capital B's golf course, and it was recently like deforested to be built. I don't really know. I assume it's a golf course because they're flags, and there's.
I mean, they could be flags to like mark where they're cutting down the trees. I don't really know.
I don't know.
I like the idea that it's a golf course.
Just because Capital B goes on about its tea times in the original Yooka-Laylee, so maybe I'm just projecting, connecting dots. I don't.
Well,
really
he
know.
also would be the kind of asshole to level an entire forest to make his golf course. So I like that idea.
Right. But yeah, just a little like. Again, it's just not necessary to have it there. Why does it exist? But it gets us talking about the overworld, gets us talking about the world, and by that virtue, it makes us more invested. I just love little unexplained details in games. Not only does it make it more real, but you're like, what is this here? I like mysteries. I like play setting for things, and yeah, this is full of that. God, I love it. I love the overworld, Cameron. Like the overworld of Impossible Lair is legitimately one of my happiest surprises of the whole previous decade of gaming. It's just I didn't expect it to be this good, and I think that's why, like, Impossible Lair, why so many people in our community right now are, like, looking at Impossible Lair, like, do I like it more than Tropical Freeze? Because that's almost heresy, right? Like, Tropical Freeze is considered this god-tier platformer. Some people consider it greater than Donkey Kong Country 2. Others refuse to go that far, but it's just like, oh, wow, Tropical Freeze was really good. And then this game comes along and you're like, but it's now all this stuff that is apparently missing from Tropical Freeze that we didn't realize before. It's like, but I think you can like both. It's not like you have to say, oh, I like this more, so sorry, Tropical Freeze, you're trash. It's not about that. It's just kind of bewildering because I don't think anybody expected Impossible Lair to be as good or better. And especially, it's an indie title, and I'm not saying like indie titles can't be better because they routinely are better than what the big studios are putting out, but you don't have as much of a budget, you don't have as many resources, and so it is always surprising when it can outclass something that had a greater amount of money pumped into it. So
yeah, and I don't even think it's necessarily a bad thing that I prefer certain things in Impossible Lair to certain things in Tropical Freeze, because it says a few things. It says, one, maybe Playtonic, as a developer and using their own original IP, can go places that a Donkey Kong game or a Banjo game can't and never will.
Right.
Which is good for building their identity, and also just it's delivering. It can deliver on something that's a fundamentally different experience from a game like Tropical Freeze, and validates, there's enough room in this town for both of them.
Exactly, yeah.
And even something I clued into recently that kind of dovetails into this, since we're about to go into the levels themselves, I had kind of, it's always been a criticism of Tropical Freeze that the bonus rooms are kind of samey between every level, and I remember expressing the thought that, at the time, I really liked the way Retro hid the bonus rooms, but I wish there was more variety, and I wish that not all of them were about collecting bananas. I wish they would bring back some of the more mission challenge-y bonus rooms of DKC 2 and 3, especially the Destroy Them All, or Bash the Baddies, which was just a challenge where you had to defeat every on-screen enemy within a time limit to get the coin. And I realized recently, Impossible Lair Impossible Lair doesn't have any bonus rooms whatsoever in its levels, which I think I ultimately prefer to repeating similar ones over and over, but it also has, in lieu of bonus levels or bonus rooms, on the overworld, it has the Pagey challenges, where the Pagies have trapped enemies inside of a obstacle course environment that you have to get through and take them all out without dying yourself. And it hit me just recently. That kind of means the only bonus levels for, in quotes, in Impossible Lair are destroy them all.
Yeah. But the great thing about that is it's different every time, and you have to use your brain to think, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to defeat these baddies? And it gets progressively harder as the game goes on, but it's a fun challenge. And yeah, because by the time, you're in the third world of Tropical Freeze, you're like, oh god, it's one of these bonus areas. And it ultimately doesn't like hurt your opinion of the game, but it does kind of become this thing where, sort of similar to the animal tokens in the original Donkey Kong Country, after a certain point, you just don't want to do it anymore. And the Pagey challenges here are always fresh and fun and varied. And so, it definitely, again, scratches another itch that you didn't realize you quite had until you realize, oh, wait, I'm itchy. This game makes you realize how itchy you all are all over. But
that's a pull quote for you. Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, it makes you itchy.
Well, getting into the actual chapters themselves, let's start with Chapter 9, Urban Uprise. And the music of Urban Uprise, I believe, is scored by Dan Murdoch. If we're pulling all of these from the Bandcamp page that Playtonic set up for Impossible Lair, so if there's any errors there, that's on them and not on us.
Yeah, I believe every level we're going to be covering in this episode, the composing duties were split between Dan Murdoch and Matt Griffin. Sometimes one did the state change and the other did the other form of the level. Sometimes one person did both.
Yeah, and the Overworld, of course, was all scored by Grant Kirkhope, so we don't need to go into that. We've already discussed that. So that's all Grant Kirkhope. But yeah, between these stages, it's those two, Murdoch and Griffin. So Urban Uprise, it for me, and again, I'm bringing up Tropical Freeze again. I apologize, but it was very reminiscent, I think, of Tropical Freeze for me a little bit, just in the scaling upward. Like, it reminded me of like Autumn Heights a little bit in those stages where you just kept progressively going higher and higher. Of course, then Tropical Freeze, that Tanabe connection, that's a hallmark of Super Mario Brothers 2. So, you say, oh, that reminds me of this game. Well, then you could just go back to what actually inspired that game. So it's all just incestuous 2D platforming. But Urban Uprise basically is, again, since all the stages take place within the Royal Stingdom, they're all variations on places within that one grand tome. And this is sort of, I guess, a city within the Royal Stingdom, but it's not really like what you would think of as a city, like Big Ape City and Donkey Kong Land or anything. It
reminds me a bit of the Black Witch Village and Saberwolf GBA a little bit, which, I mean, appropriate because of the same team, it's a team bleed over.
Right. Yeah, it's again, the Royal Stingdom is very sort of European-ish. It reminds me a bit of the Netherlands or something, just in the architecture. Everything's very sort of pastel and yellow, and there's windmills and things, but everything's kind of got this sort of unique architecture to it. And I've seen some complaints that the environments in the game start to feel repetitive, and maybe around Urban Uprise even, this is when it started to feel repetitive to people, because it's like, I feel like it just starting to feel like the same backgrounds again and again. And some of that is owing to, again, the game's limited budget. It is an indie title. But it never really bothered me. And I think it's because one, the platforming is so good that you're not really bothered by it. It's not like in the original Donkey Kong Country where, oh god, chimp caverns, more cavern stages, more mines, more of this. And, those were all great stages, but it definitely started to feel repetitive by the time you finished the game because you're expecting maybe a new archetype. And of course, that was supposed to be a lava world. They just ran out of time, so whatever. But here, though, the platforming is always inventive and fresh, and the state changes definitely spice things up. And I'm never really bothered by the reuse of assets, like, oh, here's more of the same buildings, or here's another factory level, because it does feel like, because it's all part of the same Grand Tome, it's all part of the same world as a result, and it's just different sections of the same world. And I don't know, it's, again, there's degrees to be had of when it would annoy me versus when it would not, but it never crosses that line to annoyance. And I'm just kind of more intrigued by the consistency of the world rather than just thinking, oh, they're reusing assets here.
Yeah, that's something that finally clicked with me after a while, like, because I mean, of course I noticed the asset reuse, but it did finally get to me like, oh, this is every chapter level in this game takes place within the same Grand Tome, so of course they're all going to be somewhat unified. Like, narratively, this works as a conceit, because if this were a tome that was completely intact, it would be something like the worlds we saw in Yooka-Laylee, the first game. It would be very cohesive. You'd see, like, oh, this is the village section, this is the factory section, this is the part where there's water. But because these chapters were all like sort of last ditch, like pages torn out of a single book, they're all over the place and mixed up. And so you have like some factory bits near the beginning of the game, some factory bits near the end of the game, the village bits all throughout. And like it's a cohesive environment fractured into many different pieces. So, like, narratively, it didn't bother me, and, like, playing through the game, I never felt like, oh, this again, that sort of thing. And I think part of that is, like, owing to Donkey Kong Country. Every single Donkey Kong Country game did this to an extent. It's, like, sure. Even, like, I'll throw out, say, Crazy Kremland is ostensibly the theme park level, and K3 is ostensibly the world, and K3 is ostensibly the snow world in DKC3. Both of those games only have two levels of that archetype apiece, and the rest are a mismatch of archetypes from elsewhere in the game. So I feel like Impossible Lair is kind of doing the same thing here.
Sure.
The one drawback of the way they're doing this, though, is I feel like in talking about the levels, it makes it a little bit more difficult to specifically distinguish which level is which, because, and it's owing to, honestly, an increase in technology, because, like, I'll bring up K3 again. I remember which level is Crack Shot Croc, both because it's the level where you're being shot at by an unseen enemy and playing as Squitter, but it's also the level that I remember shorthand as, oh, it's the purple factory level. And with Impossible Lair, I'm always remembering the level. It's mainly I'm going off of the level mechanic rather than the level environment.
I know as an American in 2020, as technology has advanced, I often find myself thinking, where was it that I was shot at? There's so many places. I can't distinguish them anymore. I wish one of them had been purple. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And, another thing is, like, that's the way the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy did it. The way the retro duology did it was lumping all the archetypes together in one world. And some people like that, some people didn't. So this is more of the mixed up variety, but it would be like if Crazy Kremland was split across the entire game, sort of. So you get a lot of varied environments, but it's all cohesively part of the same world. So yeah, it's asset reuse, but it's a creative way of going about it to the point where I applaud it more than get annoyed by it. So, but yeah, Urban Uprise, you're just kind of scaling upward, and you can kind of see what passes as skyscrapers in the background towards the end. I like how these like very like quaint structures, like ostensibly for a village more than a city, get turned into skyscrapers near the end. There's a lot of background details I missed the first time around, and when preparing for this episode, I went back and I was like, I never really noticed that the first time around. It
like only hit me replaying it. Like Urban Uprise is like thematically what's going on. We've said this is like a village level, but it's really a village going under like urban renewal. Like there's like the latter half of the level is girders and construction going on.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that makes the game harder to define, like archetype to archetype, because often there will be bleed over between archetypes.
And then, of course, when you alter the chapter, the exterior of the chapter in the overworld, in this case, when you fix Pipo, you push his pipe back in and he's able to blow, but oh no, he's right next to the Grand Tome. What effect does this have? And that creates the state change, Urban Uprise Updraft. You have to love the alliteration thought put into this, because again, a hallmark of classic Donkey Kong Country stages was alliteration. And it must be hard to be alliterative when you have to use. So the fact that they accomplished that with Urban Uprise Updraft, bravo. Matt Griffin did the score for the Updraft variation of UU. And talking about Donkey Kong again, this is very Donkey Kong Country 2 style, because it's winds, and not just winds, but, well, it's gusting upward a la Windy Well.
Yeah, and it took me a while to figure out that you could actually press down to sink when you were being blown up in the wind. I kept just assuming that you were completely at the mercy of the fans.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it, but I guess I figured out pretty early that you could just press down, just because I must have it's just my natural instinct to fight against whatever the game's throwing at me.
Yeah, so. I'm kind of the opposite. I usually just assume, well, the game is doing this, so evidently it doesn't want me to fight back.
Yeah. Yeah, you're very passive and go with the flow. I'm just constantly agitated at the world, so I'm lashing out. But yeah, this is a great state change, because I remember like seeing this and thinking, oh god, Windy Well, it's Windy Well. But it's not just Windy Well, it's its own thing, but it's very evocative for any DKC2 super fan. And unfortunately, I did run into a glitch here early on, and I believe this has been patched out. But so with the tonics, you can equip more checkmates in a stage, and checkmates are the checkpoints of the game, but you can put in more, so that way if you die, you respawn back at them, versus like having to spawn back all the way back at the previous checkpoint or checkmate. You add more into the level at the expense of quills. So when you finish the stage, they'll deduct some quills from your total for basically taking an easier way out. But I prefer to have this equipped on my first go around. I'll usually replay a stage, usually Capital Causeway, and try to collect quills that way with the quill enhancers, like things that make it more challenging or whatever.
Like and less checkmates, googly eyes. Like those are generally the standard ones I have, like if I'm trying to farm quills.
Yeah. But when I'm actually trying to progress in harder stages too, as the game goes on, I will use those tonics. Because in my mind, it's not cheating if it's a fundamental part of the game's structure. Just like I didn't think Cheeto pages were cheating, even though it's in the name.
Yeah, I had that rationale too with like the items and Tropical Freeze. It makes the game easier, but also you have to earn it.
Yeah.
In some way.
It's not putting in a cheat code or using a game genie and just doing it that way. It is part of the game's DNA and in-universe DNA at that. So it's not an outside factor that you're using to make it easier on yourself.
Right.
But
it's baked into the game.
Yeah, unfortunately, by adding so many, more checkmates into it, a couple bugs transpired at launch, and that was sometimes they couldn't test all the checkmates working properly. So there was one checkmate in this stage, and I tweeted about it, where it basically spawns you not at the checkmate, but it out of bounds in the stage, and you just fell. And I just fell and fell and fell. And eventually I made my way back, but I think at a point that set me back further than even having the checkmate at all. I believe they patched it out, and I was referenced in the patch notes, although not for that stage. I think they mixed up which stage it was. They said it was Hazard Hangar that I fell through the floor in, when I believe it was this one. So fix your patch notes, Platonic. But anyway, I quite endured. What? Am I having a stroke? What is wrong with me? That's my state change. Oh nope, Hyle stroked out. No, I quite enjoyed the updraft version of Urban Uprise. I think it's my favorite version of the stage.
Yeah, and I did notice on replaying this, and that it's a kind of a recurring theme in every state changed level. That, like I mentioned, the levels aren't quite as differentiated in so much as the sprite based platformers where you could tint the entire level purple. But I noticed most state changed levels, if not all of them, are modified to look very different from their original counterparts, because a lot of them have different lighting conditions.
Yeah. And
that is especially noticeable in this one, because the second you start the level, it's much darker, and the updraft has translated in the tome to mean a massive tornado.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically it looks like Tornado Alley in the US or something, just rusty, stormy sky. But yeah, it is good visual shorthand too. It might be hard to, when you see a screenshot of just any random Impossible Lair level, it might be hard to immediately identify it because of the reuse of assets. But if you're given a screenshot and said this is Urban Uprise, you would immediately be able to tell which version of the stage it was. So that is quite helpful. So moving forward to Chapter 10, and that is Rope Burn Ridge, music by Dan Murdoch. And I love this stage, and I didn't realize or remember how much I love this stage until I replayed it. But this is talking about reuse of assets, but this stage feels fundamentally different than a lot of other stages. This is climbing out of a mine and then kind of scaling upward. The conceit of the stage is you're jumping across ropes, but it is scaling up out from the mine, and then you're into kind of this lovely looking natural wilderness that just kind of expands out in the distance. And I don't know if this is at twilight or later in the day, but it's very serene looking. And as somebody who just loves natural landscapes in games, this was right up my alley. Not Tornado Alley, that was the previous stage.
Yeah, It kind of feels like, again, sometimes you can't nail down a stage to one specific level archetype, and in this one, it feels like the level essentially changes as you go from a mine level to a mushroom forest to the sky, just through vertical movement. And they're all kind of unified, though they're all kind of unified by bramble hazards, I noticed.
Yeah. Another classic beloved elements for people like us. And it sort of reminded me, too, of, how in Donkey Kong Country Returns, when you would start a stage that was the first stage in a world, and you would have the elements from the previous world start off that stage, and then they would gradually fade away until you're in the new archetype. It's sort of reminding me of that, only that was like the entire level. Like one archetype gives way to another as you continue to climb your way out of the mine.
Yeah.
And
it reminded me a bit of another game. It reminded me of DK Jungle Climber, which has one stage where you move up a waterfall that's like in a frozen environment, and when you reach the top, you're in an icy bramble area.
But yeah, like a great stage, and then its state change was Ropeburn Ridge Rerouted, music by Matt Griffin. I forget, what was the way to initiate the state change here?
I think it was, I can't remember the nature of the puzzle, but essentially the way you activate it once it's set is that you swing the rope back and forth. Because the tome is suspended.
That's
the
right.
Chapter is suspended on a precarious platform tied to a rope that isn't really mounted down.
So yeah, you basically have to run back and forth on the platform to create kind of a swinging effect, and then only then, when the platform is swinging back and forth, does the tome shift then, and you can access the state change. Which, again, really creative ways of going about the state changes, and a lot of the times they're just mini puzzles unto themselves. So, but it's always easily, and this is important, it's always easily reproducible when you play the game, because you have to always be able to access one or the other, so there can never be a permanence to how you affect the chapter on the overworld. You have to be able to get it back some way. So I can't imagine that was always easy trying to come up with these, because you can't like blow something up permanently and then never be able to access the original version of that chapter. So everything had to be reversible. So
and everything has to communicate what the level itself does in some way. And this was kind of an abstract one, which is you swing the level itself on the rope that suspends it back and forth. And when you enter the level, that's what's now going on with the ropes in the level, is they're swinging back and forth.
Yeah. So, like, and, I imagine there was a couple of different routes they could always take. I don't know what the creative process was to come up with these state changes. If they came up with what would be happening on the overworld first and then extrapolated from there, or if they came up with the idea for the state change and then thought, how can we reproduce that on the overworld so it makes sense? And maybe it was a bit of both. But yeah, that's what this one did, was just reverse the ropes. And I mean, that's better than, I guess, having a whole stage violently rock back and forth to induce nausea on everybody who plays it. But talking about what you talked about earlier about the backgrounds, now it's completely night in this stage rather than dusk. So just a little visual tweak to help sell it.
Yeah, the music across both these stages I really like too. It's a very different sound than I was used to in the original Yooka-Laylee, and a different sound than... it's a different sound than what I'd expect from like a game that was entirely composed from David Wise, but it's such a good... It reminds me a little bit of a DKC3 song, like one of those, but like going a next step beyond that into a bit more abstract. And
that bringing up Eveline Fisher's, and I referred to her maiden name because I can never pronounce her married name, so I never bother.
Yeah, I feel so bad about that because I think I say it wrong every single time, but like I don't have this problem with Louise O'Connor because I can say O'Connor.
Yeah, it's Novakek,
Novakovic, like it's spelled like Novakovic, but I don't think it's pronounced that way.
No. So I'm just like, well, she was credited as Eveline Fisher, and I can say that. So if I had to refer to her in the present tense, then I would be in trouble all the time. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about that before because I'd been thinking of, well, the original Yooka-Laylee had both Kirkhope and David Wise composing new music, but David Wise was kind of shunted off to the little corners of the game, things like Kartos, whereas Grant Kirkhope was really like the main sound. Given that Yooka-Laylee was a Banjo-Kazooie spiritual successor, that made sense. But here, like a state change is kind of flipped, where you think, okay, Wise would have the more prominence here, given that it's thought of as a 2D side-scroller. But the music of Griffin and Murdoch, because they are the Playtonic in-house composers, and it's not that Wise and Kirkhope won't be working with Playtonic going forward, but they definitely don't want to rely on outside freelance composers who probably are quite hefty in their fees given how big names they are. They want to have their in-house composers do more. So, David Wise came in and I think had one-on-one sessions with both to not really pass on what he knows, because it's not like David Wise is like Yoda. And
I kind of get the impression. I kind of get the impression it was like tone setting.
Yeah.
For the rest,
it's not like I want you to just replicate what I do and never have a voice for yourself, but to make a thematic, cohesive whole, they had to really set the tone. But I think they really do kind of occupy that space that an Eveline Fisher occupied, where she had her own sound, even though it worked well with David Wise's sound. So it is, I think, evocative, novocative of her a little bit more than even David Wise. So that's interesting. That's an interesting point, Cameron. Hadn't considered that. I keep going back to Donkey Kong Country. Well, we keep going back to all fucking 5 Donkey Kong Country games, don't we? But Donkey Kong Country 3, I keep going back to because I feel like in many ways this builds on the structure of that game and where that left off, to the point where I keep thinking, yeah, Impossible Lair is exactly what I always wanted Donkey Kong Country 4 to be. So, and I always pictured Eveline doing the music of that game because she was the one the last composer we had, discounting the Game Boy Advance remake of Donkey Kong Country 3 where Wise came back. Whew.
Yeah, and I think that again speaks to maybe an area where Yooka-Laylee as a franchise can go where Donkey Kong can't necessarily, because I know that we as a community love DKC 3, but outside and to an extent inside, it's an outlier of a game. It's the weird one out of the 3.
Yeah.
And a new Donkey Kong Country, I think, in order to meet expectations and, just brand identity, has to walk that back a little bit. Whereas Yooka-Laylee can let that freak flag fly.
Well, especially because there had been 14 years between the original release of Donkey Kong Country 3 and Donkey Kong Country Returns. And even though Force Awakening something hadn't really been a concept yet, because it was 5 years before Force Awakens, that's exactly what Donkey Kong Country Returns was. It was basically place setting and going back a little bit, setting the table then to build towards a new future. And, we could debate all day about whether or not that was the right move or whether it did it too much. But it was probably the right way to go, rather than just building on Donkey Kong Country 3 and then risk making it even weirder, or like, because the people they wanted to attract were the people who remembered the original game, not necessarily the hardcore fanatics who, know all three in and out, because they were going to bring us back no matter what. So, yeah, having Impossible Lair allows that niche to be filled versus, if it was a full-on Donkey Kong game. So,
yeah. But to bring this back around, Dan Murdoch, Matt Griffin, they did a fantastic job on this game, and I cannot wait to hear more of their stuff in whatever Playtonic has in store in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, like, they aren't working on something right now. Like, yeah, hopefully Playtonic doesn't burn to the ground over the weekend, and they cease to exist.
Yeah, it's like, I hope things didn't go like, oh, that was a very nice score you guys did for us. Well, goodbye now.
Yeah. A sinkhole opens up, and they all, go to the center of the earth. Chapter 11, Conveyor Chaos, scored by Matt Griffin. Conveyor Chaos, I know mostly as the stage where my bee is being trapped, is being caged. Oh yeah, by the way, Cameron and I are both biased because we have bee characters named after us in the game. So, should have put that at the top of the episode. If you've been listening up until now, sorry.
Sorry, you've been had. We're all actually hacks.
Yeah. Fake paid actors. Now, this is where my battalion bee, Hive Russell, is actually being kept. And, when I was playing the game first time around, I kept, like, thinking, oh man, I love this level. I would be totally okay if my bee was captured here. Like, when I say I love the level, I mean, I love the aesthetic of a level. Like, for example, Ropeburn Bridge, I was like, oh man, I hope my bee is captured here, because I really think this level is beautiful, and I would be totally okay with the bee that is ostensibly me having to spend some time here. Conveyor Chaos is a factory level, and so this is completely antithetical to a Hyle Russell stage, in that I would not want to spend all my time in a factory.
So what you're saying is it's the perfect place for you to be held against your will.
Yeah, the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? This actually works, because... Because I wouldn't want my bee to be rescued by Yooka-Laylee, and then my bee is like, no, actually I'm fine here. I don't want to go back to Queen Phoebe's shantytown in front of the Impossible Lair. Like, I want to stay here where it's nice and quiet, and I can look at this beautiful scenery, these rolling hills or these mountains in the background. No, my bee is like, get me the fuck out of here. I'm in a goddamn factory. So, thank you, Yooka-Laylee, for rescuing my bee.
Yeah, it's funny this one ended up being, like, your, in air quotes, level, because...
As if they weren't just randomly assigned. Like, I'm like putting a lot of thought into the fact that my bee was in this stage. I don't think there was any thought put into it at all, but...
But yeah, I tried to, like, remain unspoiled, like, which of our bees, your bee, mine, and Jeff's, where each of them was, because I just wanted that surprise, and I wanted to, like, just get the thrill of, like, oh, hey, I know that person. So as I was playing through this level, about you said it's a factory level, but about a third of the way through, it becomes an airship level. And at that point, I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, this reminds me a lot of the very weird abstract levels in Donkey Kong Land that were inside K. Rool's giant blimp with the, like, trippy background. Only
now, you're not confusing this with Hazard Hangar, are you?
I don't think I am. I did end up having that problem because both of them involve, like, airships.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking during this level, like, this reminds me a lot of Donkey Kong Land. And when I get to the end and saw you, I'm like, oh, of course I would find him in the level that reminds me of one of the most obscure Donkey Kong levels somebody could think of.
Yeah. God, it hurts me so much how obscure Donkey Kong Land is on a whole these days. Because, you know, I'm a vintage fan, and I remember, like, Donkey Kong Land was the second game in the Donkey Kong universe, the modern Donkey Kong. And so it was just, like, ubiquitous for me. It was just secondhand knowledge. It was like, oh yeah, Donkey Kong Land. And then I remember, you know, Christmas 95, I made a little major scene with Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2. And then, of course, Donkey Kong Land, little baby Jesus. And so now, you know, Donkey Kong Land is just forgotten about now, except by people like us. So I'm just like, hogwash the flying pig. And then nobody knows what I'm talking about. I'm just like, oh, single tear. Conveyor Chaos, though, is actually, I didn't even notice this until I think my second or third playthrough. It's an Infinity ink factory. Because if you look in the background, you see that's what they're hauling out of there is this rainbow colored viscous fluid. And it's like, oh, that's the Infinity ink. That's like established early on in the game. When you talk to Queen Phoebe, she says the Royal Stingdom, they collect the dreams of their inhabitants and they distill that into juice. And this juice is called Infinity Ink. And it's said that the Infinity Ink was used by the Ghost Riders to write the Grand Tomes. But wait a second. The Royal Stingdom is a Grand Tome. What's happening here?
It took me a while to figure this out because I don't think they ever explicitly say outright, like, oh, the rainbow-colored goop that you're seeing everywhere is Infinity Ink. But you kind of piece that together through the little world building that's going on.
Well, and there's quite a bit of world building that like goes on. But it's very economic, the world building. You know, it's not like this is an RPG or something. Like this is a 2D platformer with a top-down overworld.
It's kind of like you can read into it as much as you want to. Yeah.
And I completely missed, I think, my first playthrough that all the factories, because I was thinking, wow, Capital B has really like built up an infrastructure here since getting trapped in the Royal Stingdom. Because I believe what they're now saying is that the Royal Stingdom is the Grand Tome that Capital B was trapped in at the end of the original Yooka-Laylee. But I was like, wow, he's really like industrialized this place quick. And then I was like, no, Phoebe established when he first talked to her that they have these massive factories in here that's used to create the Infinity Ink. And Capital B has reignited these factories to distill the Infinity Ink, to collect it for his own purposes. But yeah, these aren't originally Capital B's factories.
Which is, again, why you see the massive Capital B airship fleet starting to overtake these levels.
Yeah. So a lot of great world building, but it's done, again, like I said, in an economical way, and as you said, so you can read into it as much as you want, but it's never this obtrusive thing either, where stop, get dialogue, make notes. This isn't
scan everything Metroid Prime style to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it's done in a very classic, Rare style, like back in the day. They had a hell of a lot of world building, but a lot of it was read between the lines. Like, we're going to say there's a Kremling source deep beneath Crocodile Isle, and that's the source of the Kremlings, but that's as far as we're going to go. You figure out the rest. But just stuff that really, I think, fires up the brain and really makes you ponder this world even when you're not playing the game. And that's kind of, I think, the best of both worlds. Like, of course, I would love something that's tomes and tomes, no pun intended, of text, and, we have Yooka-Laylee and the Cracklestone if we want some EU, but this isn't like, again, something like Sea of Thieves, which is kind of the more modern version of a Rare game that has a crap ton of lore, where I honestly struggle to keep up with it all, and I need to rely on things like Golden Sands blog posts to keep it straight, because there's just so much happening. This is very stripped down, but still potent. It's a potent form of world building. It's not Super Mario where there's just basically not much there, and things will just get contradicted in later games anyway. This is all cohesive and robust, but it's kind of left to you to figure out, and I think that's great. I love that because it gives me room as a chronicler of lore to have some fun with it rather than just have it explained to me. All right. So, moving we have Conveyor Chaos Crosswire, which is just the conveyor belts but reversed.
I think we've kind of talked about like some of the state changes are more significant in how they tweak the level than others. Like some are almost completely unrecognizable in the state change. I think this is one of the more understated ones because I think the basic flow and a lot of the layout is very similar to the original state. The main difference is that all of the conveyor belts are going the opposite direction.
Which might sound...
And all the mechanisms, like gears and such.
Which might sound like not a big deal, but, I mean, it's a little bit more in-depth than just, now everything's going in reverse. There's still plenty of new challenges that await you in the stage.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like playing the same level twice, but I think if you play them one after the other, you're hyper aware of how similar they are. Mm-hmm. Though we just got done talking about world building. I think this is something that, again, in replaying it in preparation for this episode, I kind of like either just noticed or became hyper aware of. The capital B airship fleet that I mentioned, like kind of crowding around the factory. In the state changed version of this stage, all of those airships, save the one that you go inside, have become Quack Corp branded airships with the giant green Q. And
they weren't in the first. I completely missed this. They weren't in the first version of the stage.
No, in the first version they have yellow and brown B stripes. In the state changed version of the level, they're green and have the giant Q on them, which there's kind of like a running theme in this game of like Dr. Quack doesn't have a like physical presence that's like in like he's not, I don't think it's a spoiler to say he's not in the game to any degree that I'm aware of, but his footprints are all over this in a very like strange, very conspicuous way that's unsaid.
Well, I mean, we know that Capital B bought out Quackcore, and so like Quackcore has always been like this facet of Ivory Towers, of Capital B's corporation. So, I like that, a lot of the elements they use or that Capital B uses would be branded as Quackcore. And it's just this really great bit of world building that, Dr. Quack isn't in the game, doesn't need to be in the game, but this is still very much part of the same world as Yooka-Laylee. So, of course, it would have Quackcore branded stuff. And, of course, a lot of, like, Capital B's elements of industry. I mean, even the bombs that are everywhere in the game are duck-themed, have the Q logo on them, make duck noises when you throw them. Yeah. So... That's the kind of stuff I love, that even when a character isn't in a game, they still exist within that world. It's not like the character is just erased from history or something. So, game-to-game continuity is another rare hallmark that I love seeing being continued under Playtonic. So it's sort of similar to, in Donkey Kong Country 2, certain characters were removed, but we still had Winky in the background at the Monkey Museum, the Espresso animal token. It's like, they're still there. They're just not being utilized in the gameplay. Buzzsaw Falls, Chapter 12, music by Matt Griffin. And again, Donkey Kong Country 3, again, Tropical Freeze, kind of reminding me a little bit of both. Obviously, waterfall stages are going to bring to mind Donkey Kong Country 3.
Of this batch, this is the most Donkey Kong-y feeling looking level, I think.
Yeah. A little bit too reminds me of World 3 levels from Tropical Freeze, Bright Savannah.
The Savannah, I had the same kind of vibe from it. I think specifically it reminds me a lot of the ones that, or of the one that Rambi is in. So I noticed in this level, I think it's kind of become like a subtle motif throughout both Yooka-Laylee games of, rainbows, or just like a rainbow color motif. Like all of the village areas all have like hand painted, like bright poppy colors everywhere. Mm-hmm. Some of the first concept art was like, had the giant rainbow, and just the fact that Yooka is a chameleon, so being multicolor is built into his identity.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of rainbows in this level as set decoration, and I guess that's in part because you're surrounded by falling water because of the waterfalls, but then it also hit me, well, yeah, that makes sense because the way you access this level is to make Nimbo rain. So, of course, that's what you're seeing in the background.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, another really cool way that the outer world affects the Grand Tome. So much so that I would be terrified if I lived in, say, the Royal Stingdom, and the fact that all these environmental changes were happening to such a alarming degree that I wouldn't feel safe. I would,
and just over really subtle things too, like a light breeze from a pipe turns into a tornado.
Yeah. Like, it would definitely be a terrifying existence. And I mean, it's like, well,
if I close one page too tightly on another, does it like squash them? I don't know.
I mean, but for all we know, we do live in a Grand Tome, and so it could be like the coronavirus is because this giant hacking googly-eyed creature is just coughing into our chapter right now, and so we're in the coronavirus state change. For all we know, look, I'm not a scientist, Cameron. I just believe what I believe from the video games I play. That's how I make my way through world. That's through the world. That's how I make my way through my life. Is just assume we're in a video game, and then everything makes sense, and everything is slightly more terrifying. But then you freeze it, because these are the pond stages with Nimbo. So you can freeze it, and then you're in the Buzzsaw Falls Frozen state change, music also by Matt Griffin. And at surface, you're like, oh, this makes this easier because it, of course, the buzzsaw in Buzzsaw Falls is due to buzzsaws. And so when you freeze it, then they're suddenly immobile. They're stuck in the frozen waterfalls, and they can't hurt you. They're stuck. But then you've got ice platforms that break away when you traverse them. It should be mentioned in the Unchained, in the original form of this level, there are hinged platforms that you traverse across a lot, and I think this stage kind of prepares you for them becoming more prominent later in the game. But the nature of them is you stand on them for a few seconds, they fall, they tilt down so you can't stand on them, and stay that way for a few seconds before righting themselves. So you kind of do this back and forth a little bit in some sections between platforms that have fallen and are about to fall to keep yourself on level ground. Mm-hmm. In the frozen state, those platforms are just gone and stay gone. Yeah.
And in addition to the buzzsaw, now the buzzsaws are frozen in the outside portions of the level. But this level, going in with the buzzsaw theme, has like an indoor sawmill type of area, and the saws are in full motion in there, and to make things more difficult, some of the ice has gotten indoors and formed icicles on that act as spike traps.
Yeah. So it's not just like, oh, now it's cold. Now it's slippy. It does create a lot of new challenges, and sometimes it makes it to your benefit. Sometimes it makes it to your hindrance. So
yeah, I feel like freezing a level could have very easily been a crutch in this game for state changes.
Yeah,
like we can't make every level frozen.
Well, especially because there's already so many goddamn comparisons to Tropical Freeze. We definitely can't just go through and freeze all the stages. Can't do that. But of course they had to do it just a little bit, and you can't fault them for that. And then speaking of the freezing stages, we've got Chapter 13. Oh man, I love this. Cliffside Quest. Matt Griffin does the music. I should just say he does the music for both the normal one and the state change as well. But this one, when I talk about, like, sometimes the stages don't immediately stick in your brain because of the reuse of assets, this one is lodged into my brain because of how unique the concept of it is. And this is the whole stage is basically non-linear gem collecting.
Yeah, this one sticks in my brain too because it's a fundamentally different type of level than any other level in the game. Well, this pair of levels is.
Yeah. So you start the stage, and at the end of every level, there's a big capital B statue with a glass hive holding the Royal Battalion member hostage, and then you break the glass hive and you free them, and then that's the end of level target or whatever, and then the level's done. Well, at the beginning of Cliffside Quest, boom, the capital B statue's right there holding up the glass hive, but you can't get to it because the glass hive is encased by this protective barrier or shield with is it 5 slots for the gems? It's some amount.
Yeah, I think it's 5.
Yeah. So you're like, oh, well, what do I do? Well, you have to traverse the stage, you have to explore it, and find all the gems needed to break the barrier and access the glass case. So it's structured very differently from the other levels in the game.
It feels a little bit like 3D platformer sensibilities in a 2D level, which was really appropriate for this game, and an interesting way to go about it.
Yeah, so basically you have to be Thanos, and you have to go around and find all of the gems, but with a much happier ending than that example. But yeah, this one I think might be one of my favorite stages in the game, just because I really liked going through it, and you could kind of mark your progress, like, have I been here by, the twit coins, because there's still 5 twit coins to be had. So, if you found a new twit coin, you knew, oh, I haven't been here yet. I'm on the right path. But you never got completely lost, and it was very easy to wind your way back if, oh, I've already been through here. But it's very easily get back to that central hub, that central marker of the capital B statue. And I really like too that you can see he's actually holding 2 of the glass hives, one in front and one in the back, and then when the state changes, those are switched. So just a clever way of, like, he's got both in his hand, but you can't get to the one without the state change. And then the state change, you're freezing the pond again. It's Cliffside Quest Cold. It's the same, but wintry, and you still have to go through and collect the 5 gems, but they're in different locations now, and you have to worry about the winter weather, which makes things slippy.
So we should make special mention that the cold version of this level is where you find Jeff Dronin.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jeff. Sorry, I forgot about you.
Which this was another one where, like, much like your level, I thought, like, oh, this is thematically, probably almost certainly coincidentally, but thematically, like, perfect for the person this represents, because Jeff is a person I kind of associate with like inventive game design theory, and this level kind of going off script like this and becoming something entirely different, I felt like in my head I can kind of file them analogous to each other a little bit. I don't know how he feels about this level exactly, but at least to me it just feels appropriate.
See, for me, this just reminds me of Jeff because he lives in Michigan and it's cold there.
Also works. Yeah, not going to get to talk about where my B is in this episode, are we?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Cameron. And the reason is because yours is sort of later in the game, but sort of not.
It's a weird case where, and I like I want to talk about where that B is, but I also, right after release, got a kick out of how many people were having a difficult time figuring out where I was.
Yeah.
And trying to get me to tell them outright, and I got to gleefully string them along. And
I think
because I think it's an area where you just have a satisfying big brain moment when you figure it out.
Yeah. I think you lucked out in that. No, your B is not readily accessible, but it's when you can access it, it's in one of the more memorable moments of the game. So I think you definitely got the prime's level to have your B hidden in.
And
in my opinion.
And thematically, I won't go into detail, but thematically I think it's appropriate for me as well because it has shades of Banjo-Tooie in it that become apparent when you know what it is.
Yeah.
And that's all I'll say.
So, yeah, sorry we don't get to discuss your B on this episode, Cameron, because we're only doing one more chapter.
But I just tricked you into doing it.
Ah, fuck you. Chapter 14 is our final chapter we'll be discussing, because that's the final chapter before the 5th paywall. And chapter 14 is Hazard Hangar. Hangar like a aircraft hangar, not hanger like a dick.
I definitely got this one confused, as you alluded to earlier, with Conveyor Chaos because of the thematic connotation of the name.
Yeah. Although I should say that I said it's not referencing the male genitalia, but the state change is called Hazard Hangar Hung. So I don't know what's going on in Platonic's mind.
That said, the level name does have kind of a double meaning because you do engage in some hanging in this level.
Yeah, you do let it all hang out. Dan Murdoch is the one who let it all hang out with the music, but this is a hangar for the aforementioned airships, I believe. I assume the B airships, but then they're used by Capital B, as Capital B is kind of slowly infesting the Royal Stingdom with his forces. But this is an aircraft hangar that culminates in you climbing across hanging netted shipping cargo that's being hauled across the sky. And this sort of reminded me of Donkey Kong Land, because obviously Donkey Kong Land has blimp stages, and while you never crawl across anything being hung from the blimp, it's still for whatever reason triggered that in my brain.
It's very satisfying to have a level archetype that's thematically similar to Donkey Kong Land's blimp levels, but also grounded in any sense of reality, because Donkey Kong Land's blimp levels are full-on wacky town. It's not
I don't
exactly
know.
clear what you're staring at in them.
Yeah, so it's funny because I was just thinking about this earlier today, completely independent of this episode, because I was writing for the Facebook page, and I do a weekly feature on the Facebook page called "Let Me Level with You," where I go through every stage in a Donkey Kong Country or Land game. And right now I'm up to Donkey Kong Land, Big Ape City, and the blimp stages. And today I believe the blimp stage was Fast Barrel Blast, which is the 4th level in Big Ape City and the 2nd blimp level. And because it's always been like, what am I staring at in the blimp stages? Because you're going across like the underside of the blimp, and you can like make out like oil drums and like the actual like infrastructure of what you're walking across. But then you've got like windows with clouds in them, and then in the background there's the scrolling tiles.
The scrolling tiles paired with the static windows is what always threw me off, because I didn't know if maybe the intention was like you're standing in like an unadorned part of the blimp and seeing like the skyscraper behind you roll by, but then the clouds might also move. I don't know what's going on. Somebody please explain to me what's going on.
So here's how I've rationalized it, Cameron. The background tiles are skyscraper windows, and of course it's an implausible skyscraper, but just like the Gangplank Galleon is the most implausible ship ever committed to fiction, we'll just roll with it. But the windows, I think they're supposed to be like, not windows, but a reflective glass or surface that's reflecting the clouds on the other side of the blimp, which doesn't make much sense, but that's how I've rationalized it, Cameron, and that's what I'm going to go with. Because I don't think the blimps are supposed to be full on Wacky Town. I just think...
I mean, aside from, climbing on the UI to get across...
Yeah.
part of the level.
But I just think whatever art direction was going on, something wasn't communicated very clearly in that, and it has shades of Cloud Cuckoo Land of Banjo-Tooie, which is funny because there are cloud levels in Donkey Kong Land which have like bizarre like heart tiles but it's less crazy looking than the blimp stages than in the next world over. All right, so sorry, that's Donkey Kong Land. Impromptu Donkey Kong Land near 25th anniversary discussion. Hazard Hangar, though, yeah, I just loved crawling across that cargo. And you pointed out to me in the show notes that the netted cargo appears earlier in the game.
Yeah, so this is one of those, again, an instance of asset reuse paying off in like creating a cohesive world, because I had happened to notice that when playing Urban Uprise, a similar netted cargo, a netted batch of cargo appears in the background of that level being carried by a crane.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like you seeing like that cargo up close and like it being like carried back and forth again.
Yeah, and the cargo itself, like the crates, are marked with the Quack Core insignia. So it's like, yeah, capital B. I don't know if this is the Infinity ink, but capital B is basically like hauling it up and shipping it out and using it for his purposes.
Now, I'm curious, Hyle, because I think I've seen like mixed response to this. When you first encountered this netted shipping cargo, did you immediately understand that it was you were supposed to press up to grab the net and climb across it, like kind of like Mario in the like nets of Super Mario World?
I did it immediately, but I think that's just because I'm a very twitchy, pacey sort of gentleman, and I'm always like mashing the controls to see what I can do. So it didn't affect me, but yeah, I could definitely see it tripping up a lot of people, or not tripping them up because they don't touch the net and they just fall right through.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think the first time I did this level, I expected that to be like a solid box in the foreground. So I may have just like rolled immediately passed it, saw that you could go through it, and then fell to my death. And then I figured out you're supposed to grab it. I think that's maybe what happened. I know it didn't take me a long time to figure out what was going on, but it was ambiguous at first. And I think some other people I've interacted with who played the game had a harder time telling what was going on.
Yeah, and they have. I don't think they've added anything in the patch to like better communicate.
I really don't know how you could, short of like throwing, like you don't have checkpoint to pop out of Professor Chops to pop out of a bush.
I'm so glad I'm not the only one who still does that, who still just instinctively refers to the tutorial pig from the retro Donkey Kong Country games as Checkpoint, which was the fanon name we gave him because Retro didn't name him until Tropical Freeze. It's still a better name, Checkpoint, but Professor Chops I've gotten used to.
I appreciate that we have checkmates in this game.
Yes. Oh, and another thing they didn't add with the patch, much to my chagrin, is that they still refer to the Laylee bells as Laylee bells in the tonic, and they haven't gone through and renamed them Dingbats, which is the name suggested by DK Vine 4 member Planet Cool and embraced and accepted and made canon by Playtonic after the fact. And I asked Daly about this. I was like, hey, they're still called Laylee bells. And so I think they're going to correct that in yet another patch whenever that comes.
I was honestly shocked they were not always Dingbats.
I know! It's like one of those things where I could see like a team of people just missing it. Because it seems like it's the most obvious name.
I mean, it seems obvious to me as an outsider who didn't have to build this entire game.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it was created somehow without the pun in mind. But it's right there.
Like it's like when you've written something large and like you've reread it and proofread it yourself like 8 times, and then somebody immediately catches the one typo that you made.
Yeah. And when you're too close to a project, it can be hard to kind of take a step back, and that's why we as fans can do that so often. But when you're actually in the creative process, it's much harder. So it's very easy to like sit on the sidelines and nitpick something, but when you're in the thick of it, you kind of have to, and that's why like the show that I wrote for that won an Emmy. No, I'm not bragging or anything. The division of work kind of worked in my favor because I was writing it from a distance. I wasn't actually on set except for the final episode. So to be able to write from a distance, I kind of gained the perspective. My own show that I co-created, I was a fan of it rather than involved in a production. And so that kind of allowed me to keep all of the pieces straight. So, basically what I'm saying is, always work from home. Dingbat, Planet Cool named them, and so Planet Cool has now contributed more to the official canon of the DKU than either one of us have done, Cameron. So, yeah, bravo. Anyway, where were we? Where were we? I think they could have communicated it by having a dialogue, a text bubble pop up for Yooka-Laylee, because that's the way they do that in the game. Is everything is communicated usually through pop-up text bubbles, like in a very comic booky sort of way, and one of them could have said, do this, or whatever, but maybe that would have taken us out more.
I think it might be one of those things like they just expected, like, eventually you're going to figure this out.
And it's not a deal breaker.
It's not the barrel in Casino Night Zone and Sonic 3. It's a little bit easier to figure out than that, because your only alternative is to fall to your death. You're not going to get stuck at that point and just have no way forward at all.
So you die a few times and then you figure it out. Because if you die, you're like, okay, I'm missing something. Let me play with this. Let me experiment. And I mean, I think the best platformers always involve gratuitous death. So
which you can do plenty of in this game because there's no live system.
That's right. And the state change to Hazard Hangar, the aforementioned Hazard Hangar hung, it's literally just that. It is upside down because so the location of Hazard Hangar, the chapter on the overworld, is actually back up in the desert because you kind of move up from the golf course / logging area up to the corner of the desert, and you have to do all this stuff. But basically, long story short, you flip the platform that the Grand Tome is on, and then it's hanging upside down, and then you access it by going underneath it, and you like going in that way. And so literally everything is hanging upside down, except for Yooka-Laylee. So it's basically the floor is the ceiling now.
Yeah, and this is really interesting to play out because, like, the background will still, like, the original state and this change state both have a toxic liquid in them that you can't touch at all. And it's on the bottom in both stages. So the stage is still affected by gravity, even though you can see, like, all the windows and stuff in the background are upside down.
Yeah. So it's again, clever that they're able to get so much mileage out of the concept of state changes.
And it doesn't feel disorienting either.
It doesn't, no. And, I mean, just like I would imagine if your reality suddenly reversed and you were suddenly walking on the ceiling, it would be disorienting only for a bit until you acclimated to your new gravity, essentially. I can't say I've ever had that experience.
Yeah,
you also break the Royal Battalion member free in a unique way in this stage. So much so that I wasn't ready to end it when it ended it, because I didn't realize what happened would actually break open the glass hive. Because I think I was missing a twit coin and I was still trying to explore a little bit, but a missile hit the hive and broke it open.
Yeah, so the glass hive is kind of placed in a spot where it's very difficult to get Yooka-Laylee to actually hit it with any of their attacks and movement. But toward the end of the stage, you start seeing, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of these enemies at the moment, but they shoot missiles that I guess are lizard-seeking missiles that kind of will follow Yuka's movement until they collide with anything else.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to lure that one into the lure one of those into the path of the hive in order to shatter it and end the level.
Right. So it's just fun. This game is just fun, Cameron. I realize, like, we've only talked about the middle part of the game, essentially, on this episode, and so I shouldn't really give any, like, grand final thoughts about the game itself, but, God, I just love it. This is such a god-tier game, in my opinion. And again, I have a character named after me in the game. So does Cameron, so does Jeff.
It's honestly surreal how little that matters in my evaluation of the game.
I forget about it.
Yeah.
I totally honest, when I'm playing the game, I don't even like register that I have a B character in the game unless I stumble across it and I'm like, oh, that's right. But this game is so good, and it's like a warm hug from a long lost friend, because it's a type of game that's, again, very evocative of the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy, but in a modern sense. It's not like it's a throwback. It's building on what came before with a lot of the same sensibilities to create something new. And it's just ticking off all these boxes that never get ticked off for me. And I have to make like compromises. I'm like, yeah, I enjoy that game. But man, I really wish, they made games like this again. And they do. And here it is. And I was like, oh my God. And the more I've sat with this game since October, the more I've come to the idea that like this is I think, like, definitely one of my favorite games of the last decade, but it's also one of my favorite games of all time. And yeah, I think I might like it more than Tropical Freeze. And I still love Tropical Freeze, and I don't really like ranking games all that much because I think it's like implying like, oh, this is definitely better than this in every way. No, Tropical Freeze is better in some ways, but overall package wise, like I see myself playing Impossible Lair a lot more than Tropical Freeze. And I'm just like, on my ranking of the top 25 DKU games of the decade, I put this at number 3, just because it was still so new, and it still is so new. But I mean, it might be number 2. And it's, I really do love the hell out of this. And it's so funny because, Yooka-Laylee I really liked, but I understood why that game was so divisive, and I understood why it was disappointing for a lot of people. And this game is just 5 stars all the way. Like, it shows like Playtonic can make an exceptional game without question. Like without all those caveats that are like, oh yeah, it's good, but there are no buts here. This is just a stellar game. And I wish more people would play it. I hate that it's still so much under the radar.
Yeah, I really want to shout about this game from the rooftops. It's just get the word out. It's honestly kind of unreal that a game can feel like it's obvious the game has like a lower budget than your Tropical Freezes, but it doesn't feel like it feels fulfilling.
Yeah.
With what they're able to accomplish. It like I don't go in and feel like, oh, I wish they could have pushed this more. And I guess another thing that's kind of nice about this game is, and I think it's a bit to do with the pedigree of it, the design sensibilities of this game remind me a lot of the Rare Portable Team titles. Like, it came up in the interview you did, a lot of the similarity lies with Saberwolf on the GBA. Mm-hmm. And it kind of made me aware that so many of these out-of-the-box design decisions from eras past were because you want to execute this one specific thing as part of your game, but for technical reasons, you have to go about it in a completely different way. Like, say, Grunty's Revenge on the GBA. Like, that is trying to deliver a 3D Banjo experience through a top-down game with added depth, because you just can't do a 3D environment on the GBA. But we're going to give you something close, and that will evoke the same feeling. This game, like, the technical constraints are out the window. This game could have had a full 3D overworld that was functionally what the gameplay of Yooka-Laylee was like. There's no technical reason stopping it from being that way. But it's a conscious choice to turn it into this top-down Zelda-like environment, not because it's the absolute limit of what you can do, but because it's a conscious choice, and you recognize the merit in making that conscious choice and the strengths that comes with it in tightening your game design. And I really, really like that about it.
Yeah, and sometimes limitations can be a good thing. And I was thinking in terms of like the budgetary limitations this game had versus a Tropical Freeze. Tropical Freeze had those gorgeous cutscenes and all of that spit and polish, but Impossible Lair does so much with less, and it allows your brain to fill in the gaps, so much so that it feels just as robust as Tropical Freeze did, because it makes the most of what it has, and it fires up your imagination. And so it's kind of like when you've seen those things where they leave out certain letters and words, but your brain just immediately fills in what it is. That's what this game does. And it does it so well. And I said like before when I was talking about this game, like I think the quote was something like the budget thing you don't even notice, and it's true. You don't notice it because they do so much with what they have, and your brain does the rest. So seriously, play this game, and they have a free demo out now on all platforms. Well, all platforms that the game is available on. Sorry, Linux fans. Sorry, all those people who played Yooka-Laylee on Linux. You're out of luck here, but it's on Switch, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and Steam, and so you can download it. It's free. You've got few stages in there. You've got a Pagey challenge. You got a state change, a few tonics. You can even try and complete the Impossible Lair if you're skilled enough. But any progress you make in the demo will then carry over into the game if you decide to purchase it, and you should, or else I'll be mad at you. So anyway, that's my little shill, and I would be shilling for it even if I wasn't a bee. I swear. Seriously, I like the game, and I don't care that I'm just patch me out of the gameplay, Tonic. I don't even. No, don't do that. That's all I have to live for.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.